Hello, everyone. My name's Gary Barnes, and I'm doing the presentation today. Um, you should be able to see on your screen the title slide that says Managing Employee Performance and Conflict, and you should be able to hear me talking. And I have with me Brenda Allen, who is helping me in the background, um, also from Reliant Behavioral Health. And so we're presenting. Let me just introduce myself a little bit while we wait for people to come on. Um, so I'm Gary Barnes. I am a clinical social worker uh, with, I, it gets to the point where it's a little embarrassing how much experience I have because I sound old, but I think I'm at 30 years this year. Um, and have done a lot of employee assistance program work. The presentation that we're doing today, I've presented on this topic, you know, I may be in the hundreds of times um, over the years because this is a core issue for employee assistance programs. We want to be able to help employers manage employee issues, employees who are not performing, but also employees who are not performing well often are the same employees who have personal issues and could use the employee assistance program. So we want to help you encourage them to get to us for counseling assistance. All right, let's move on. You can't talk to me. You're in listen only mode. You can send questions and we'll address those at the end. I'm going to try to keep track of the time uh, so that we leave 5 minutes at the end for questions. Um, we will go for a full hour, so we'll go until 1 o'clock. I understand some of you may need to jump off early. Um, and that's okay. Hopefully you won't jump off too early where I think you're you're falling asleep or something. Um, there is a handout attached as well, universal job expectations, and you'll see me reference that within the presentation. So do send questions and comments, and Brenda will help me with those um, as we go on, so that I can focus on the slides. The other thing that I would say is that I have a reputation for putting too much information into presentations, and I'm sure my reputation will continue today. There'll be a lot more in here than I probably will be able to cover in great detail. Um, Hopefully, though, it allows more opportunity for things to come up that may resonate with you and you might want to think about or look at further. Okay. So we're not able to ask polling questions. We have two of them in the presentation. The software or the GoToMeeting application isn't working properly today. But this would have been a question I would have asked you because I'm interested in why you're attending the webinar. And these were the things I could think about. Maybe you're just wanting to attend to get better at what you do. Maybe a lot of people attend these trainings because they have a situation currently going on. Or there could be another reason. Maybe your manager asked you to attend. You just love to learn. You see that these are free, uh, which I think is a great reason. I don't know why more people wouldn't attend these. It's free. It's an education you can have on your own. It's convenient for you, etc. So what I would say is if your answer is number two, you have specific concerns about how to manage an employee, remember that you do have a benefit through the Employee Assistance Program that you can call the EAP and talk with a person like myself, a clinician, with experience in employee assistance programs and working with troubled employees or problem employees, whatever term you like. Um, and so you can talk uh, confidentially with someone. While we always encourage you to work with your manager and with human resources uh, when you're managing performance issues with employees, um, the conversation with an EAP uh, person is sort of like going to a counselor. It's somebody independent who you can share whatever you want to share with, and help you get your head on straight to decide what to do next. It's not to replace um, going through the channels that you normally would through your organization. Okay, so I like to start here. We won't have time to actually do this exercise, and it's kind of hard to do in a webinar fashion anyway. In fact, it's probably impossible. Um, oh, hang on. Sorry, I'm one slide ahead. This is what we're going to cover today. So this is kind of my model for what I think. This is how you manage performance issues and conflict problems with employees and with teams. Always start by building rapport. You want to have trust and safety to the extent that you can with your team. So we always start there. Then we you want to make sure that you're clear about what your expectations are of people and are consistently giving feedback and support and getting feedback and support about that. And then when you do have issues, the third bullet, being intentional, organized, and consistent about how you manage it. So not just popping off or, you know, uh, uh, having off the cuff conversations with people. Usually when you are having problems with someone, it's a time to become more intentional, more planful, maybe a little more formal in the way that you interact with that person. And then practicing good conflict management yourself is the fourth thing, and then coaching others to do the same. And we'll get into some of this. Okay. Now, here's what I was starting to talk about, the first exercise. So I love this exercise, and I'd encourage you to take 1 minute while I'm talking and just think of somebody that you've worked with over your career, or more than one person, but usually, and who comes to mind right away? Somebody who you enjoyed working for, felt motivated by, admired, sort of you felt motivated to do your best. And then the question is, why? What made you think that that what makes you think of them now as being good? And then the next part of that is to write down, and we won't have time to do this today, but I'd encourage you to do this offline. Why? What are the characteristics that makes you say they were a great supervisor? Because that is going to lead to a better understanding and better insight about yourself. How many of those characteristics do you think you have? And are there some that you don't have? Because we all have a slightly different style. There are some characteristics that somebody else might have that you envy. You don't think you really, that's not really the way you are. But then the next question, what gets in the way of you, being better? What gets in the way of you being more the way that you want to be? And then what would you say your greatest strength is as a supervisor? And this is an important question because as you'll learn as we go through the presentation, when you have problems with employees, it's actually a relatively rare occurrence. Most of the time, hopefully, your employees are doing a good job and trying to do the best they can, and you get along well with them. And so you want to use your strengths. because that's going to work most of the time with most people. And then, what would you say is your biggest weakness or shortcoming or vulnerability? Because that often is going to come out when you're struggling with an employee issue or with a conflict. So know yourself really helps. So as I promised, I showed you those 4 bullets, which I will go back. Remember those? Um, build rapport. So we're going to start with building rapport. Ideas for building rapport. So to be a powerful communicator, to set the stage of respect and collaboration, here are some ideas that I have. Take responsibility for your part of any problem or issue. So you don't have to take responsibility for the whole thing, but you can always say, um, it is true that I didn't do this or did do this, and that was a mistake on my part. You're always soft on the person and firmer on about behavior, and so there's never a reason to be mean. There's never a reason to be harsh. As you'll hear me say later in the presentation again, and I may say it several times, I say this to clients all the time, and that is uh, being hard on yourself or being hard on another person is demotivating. It might not seem like that, but the research, the psychological research, is pretty clear on that. There's a number of pretty good studies where they've illustrated this, that when you're judgmental, self-judging, or judging of others, it tends to move people in the opposite direction from where you want them to move. So being soft on people, and we'll talk about ways to do that, is not the same as letting them get away with things or just letting people do whatever they want or whatever you think that is. But it's just being encouraging with your words. Listening obviously makes a powerful communicator, and undervalued as a skill, I know. Uh, a powerful communicator asks for what they want and when they want it. Um, you take complaints seriously and investigate them. You're willing to be wrong, or like I said, accept multiple truths. So it's not one person's wrong and the other person's right all the time. We can all be wrong about something. We can all be right about something too. And then you have the ability to talk clearly about your feelings when appropriate, um, which is not the same as uh, bleeding your feelings all over other people, but it's being able to be articulate about your thoughts and feelings, um, can really make you a powerful communicator. And then soft startups and repair attempts um, are terms you may not be familiar with. A soft startup is how you start a conversation. And it turns out that, and I have another slide about this later on, but it turns out that how you start a conversation is the best predictor of how it's going to end. Um, and so if you start a conversation in a positive manner, it there's a statistically much higher likelihood of it um, ending well. And and repair attempts are exactly what they sound like. It's attempts to uh, right the ship when you see that a conversation is going awry. There's a lot of feelings, negative feelings. Um, you make an attempt to repair the situation. And then finally, we appreciate the differences among coworkers. Culture, gender, age, life experiences, personalities. We're all a little different, and I think a powerful communicator not only acknowledges but even appreciates and encourages the differences, um, and it helps you pull out the unique strengths that each person has. Alrighty, so building rapport. Creating trust, showing others that you care about them, listening to their concerns, help them develop solutions. These are probably not new ideas for you. And vulnerability is the foundation of trust. Um, I borrowed this from Patrick Lencioni. He wrote a book called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. It's a great book if you have time to read. He writes in parable form, so his books are always he tells a story to make his points, and so those are fun. So vulnerability is the foundation of trust, and being predictable and consistent. Okay, creating positives in your relationship that we call the emotional bank account. This comes from the marriage research of John Gottman, the idea that if you have a 5-to-1 ratio of positives to negatives in your in any relationship, but their research was specifically about marriage, then good things happen. Um, Conflict is less um, destructive when it happens, and there's more of a tilt toward the positive, toward uh, forgiveness and giving people a break. So, spending time creating positives in your relationships pays off down the road. All right, boundaries. So you want to be caring and concerning and show concern for your employees. But I put this slide in here. I already confessed that I'm a clinical social worker, so some of you may be saying, "Oh my gosh, this guy just wants us to be everybody's friend." But that's certainly not what I'm talking about. You always want to do it with good boundaries. And in the workplace, this means specific things. You don't want to over disclose. You want to um, uh, be able to take care of your own personal things in your own way without relying on employees uh, for that. And so this is a whole nother presentation on where the lines are for boundaries. But I think you know when you're feeling uncomfortable, um, that's usually a sign that you need to pull back. And like I said, when you're having difficulty with an employee, it's usually the time to tighten up those boundaries a little bit, become a little more formal in the way that you communicate. Okay. Establish trust and healthy communication by uh, unfiltered debate. So this is going to matter when we get back to communication down the road. I mean, excuse me, when we get back, talk about conflict at the end of this presentation. If you can set the stage early on where people are comfortable with being able to have differences and share those differences. So you could see where maybe you could see what I'm building on. If you can establish trust and then you can establish that it's okay for us to disagree, it's even okay for us to get annoyed with each other a little bit. Um, then when conflict becomes if more destructive, um, you have more familiarity with it and you can um, manage it better. So we could differentiate healthy conflict um, as this sort of unfiltered debate. And the more you get people's opinions, like if you have an idea or there's going to be a change in the organization, the more you can get people to voice their objections to it, the more buy-in you will get down the road. So there you go. You're setting the stage for better conflict management. All right. So I'm trying to go through these pretty quickly. Clarity and consistency. Obviously, being clear about your expectations up front. You can see again, I'm trying to help set the stage um, for when you have a problem with an employee or a conflict. All right. and following through on your commitments. All right. More good stuff here. Hang on. I skipped past a slide. Didn't mean to do that. Your work habits and behavior. So be a role model, show gratitude, disagree and commit, be willing to make decisions when you need to. So these are all ways to be a strong enough leader that people learn to rely on you and trust you. Accountability with support. Hold people accountable for performance and agreements. It can be done through questions, clarification, tied back to team goals. But this should be done on a regular basis and not in annual performance uh, appraisals, which is not usually the best way to tell people that they're not following through. Okay, focusing on your strengths. And there's a lot of good work out there. I don't know if any of you know about this, but there's a whole industry of literature and experts who work in the area of strengths. Um, the Gallup organization has been doing this for a long time. They have a test called Strengths Finder. And then there are a couple of really excellent books. A guy named Marcus Buckingham used to work for Gallup, now works on his own and writes about strengths. But I really think this stuff is valuable, and it's really understanding. It's really trying to focus on what your strengths are, and really trying to identify the strengths of the people who work for you, um, and play to those strengths, as as opposed to identifying what people aren't good at and trying to build skills in that area. That can also be helpful, and sometimes that's necessary. But we find that you get more success if you identify what somebody's already good at, and then how do you use what you're already good at to improve your job performance. And people feel supported, they feel encouraged for who they are, and they feel more motivated. Okay, so that was super quick. And now we're going to move into the second sort of part of this presentation, which is managing employees with performance problems. So where I start is an observation that less than 10% of coworkers have chronic performance issues. For most of you, probably way less than even 10%. Usually it's one or two people who you struggle with, who may be constantly a little bit, underperforming, or intermittently underperforming, or just have issues that create problems, you know, either periodically or fairly consistently. Um, Another observation is that people become difficult often because of problems in their life outside of work, or just because of their temperament. Temperament is what we call a fixed trait. You could see the work of Jerome Kagan, um, where they studied people starting at 18 months, and uh, even after Jerome Kagan retired, another researcher picked up following the same cohort. So they were following their level of reactivity starting at age 18 months, and found, to their chagrin, they didn't want to find this actually, that sort of the way you are at 18 months in a way is the way you probably will be at age 8, at age 16, and probably at age 30 or 40. And that means how reactive you are to your environment. That doesn't mean that people who are highly reactive to problems or issues in their environment can't learn skills to manage it. But often you have people who work for you who you might call a hothead, or somebody that gets flustered easily, um, reactive to problems, to issues, uh, to smells, to sounds. These are all issues of temperament that probably are not going to change. Whereas the first thing here, the problems in their life outside of work, often often do change. Not always. Some people have constant problems in their life outside of work. So there are other reasons employees have performance problems, and some of those are related to the work environment itself. But these are two areas: problems outside their life and work, and temperament, that I would invite you to think about as we go through this. This is where the handout that we sent you comes in. Universal expectations, and they're right here. Um, the handout that you have gives more description about each of these. What we find is that everyone, hopefully, most of the people who work for you probably, and hopefully you do as well, a job um, uh, have job expectations that are specific for your job. And the idea is that these are universal. These are things that are expected of all of us. And they're not necessarily spelled out, just when you get hired, these are the things that are expected: quality of work, dependability, communication, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll see on here, job knowledge and technical skills is just one of, how many are on here? 12? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And job knowledge and technical skills is only one of them. One of the mistakes that we make as managers and supervisors is that sometimes we would call job performance um, job knowledge and technical skills. And we don't feel uh, that we have the right to expect some of the other ones on here. Like, I think most of us would expect a certain quality of work, um, but usually the problems that you have with employees are in other areas, like reaction to stress, um, communication, relationships, judgment, um, motivation tend to be the things that you're actually dealing with. So we find that this handout is super helpful to help you identify what are the issues. And the handout, because it gives descriptions of what some of the deficits might be, it gives you ways to articulate what the actual problems are that you're having with employees, because that becomes a problem all on its own. How do I put into words why I'm having trouble with this employee, or why their coworkers are complaining about them? So that handout gives you some words that you can use to articulate that. So back to the slide. It goes beyond the technical duties of the employees, gives you categories that more clearly define your expectations and the problems, and helps you to articulate the issues you're having. Okay. So when you have an employee that has performance problems, um, you can look at the problem, and if it is a skill deficit, a knowledge deficit, a resource or tool deficit, or an experience deficit, then you probably have some responsibility to help the employee solve the problem. You can help them with skill development. You can provide education for knowledge. You can provide resources and tools. Um, and you can um, assign mentors to help them with experience, or dial back your expectations of them because of experience. So you want to rule this out. And when the performance problems continue and you rule out those issues, then in our view, meaning the EAP view, this is when you may have a personal problem lurking underneath. You may or may not know about a personal problem, but you can guess that there may be stuff going on behind the scenes. And it could be any of these things or issues that aren't even on this list. Okay. Um, and I should point out that you only know about what an employee tells you. So I'm not likely to come into work and brag about the fight I had with my wife last night. I might come to work and brag about the 3 goals that my kids scored in soccer yesterday. Um, so then you would know that, but you may not know that I'm having issues in my relationship. And some of these, of course, we hide more than others, like substance abuse. I might not even acknowledge that I have an issue with that myself, let alone tell you about it. So, anyway, if there is a personal problem, probably you as a supervisor or manager are not the person that's going to solve it. It's going to be resolved through one of these other, they can get help for it through one of these other means. And this is where referral to the employee assistance program comes in. So if you've ruled out uh, knowledge, skills, experience, and resources as the problem, then you can bring up the EAP as a possibility for an employee if they're having continued performance issues. I should point out that some of you may be really good at counseling your friends or your family members. Um, One of the reasons why I think I'm a pretty good counselor. One of the reasons why I can be an effective counselor or therapist is because my clients don't know me. I'm not their supervisor. I'm not their spouse. I'm not even their friend. So I have a unique professional relationship with them. So just because you may be good at it doesn't mean that you can do it with somebody who works for you. I don't try to provide counseling for my family or friends either. So just keep that in mind. All right, so here's a guiding philosophy for managing troubled employees. Respect and privacy should always be paramount, even if employees don't seem to indicate that it matters to them. Don't ever go it alone. You don't need to. You have other resources. You have your EAP. You have human resources, probably most of you. You have uh, colleagues who deal with these issues. So, don't ever feel like you have to manage these problems without seeking help and assistance. Safety, equity is a word we use instead of fairness. Equity just means that you're applying the same general principles, the same expectations, sort of across the board. Um, so you're not singling somebody out and expecting something different from them than you would from others. And then the health and well-being of all. And the reason that's on there is in part because if you're not taking responsibility to manage an employee problem that you have, you may be contributing to negatively affecting all the coworkers because then they have to deal with the problem, um, and they may not have the power or the authority to deal with it in the way that you can. And ideally, we create a win for all parties. All right, intervention principles. We want to convey respect and value, have an agenda, always have an agenda for what you're trying to accomplish when you are talking to an employee. Emphasize the issues needing attention, put in writing if needed, and always create a follow-up plan because intervening with an employee is usually not our favorite thing. And so by creating a follow-up plan, you're committing to the next step. When are we going to follow up on this and meet again? The dangers for you as a supervisor are what we call the Popeye strategy. We borrow this from the Popeye cartoons where Brutus, picks on Popeye through, 80% of the cartoon, ties olive oil to the train tracks, and Popeye sort of puts up with it, puts up with it, puts up with it, then eats a can of spinach and beats the crap out of Popeye, and then the cartoon ends. Sometimes supervisors do this. They put up with, put up with, put up with, and then are overly harsh with an employee. And as I've said already in this today, that uh, is demotivating. That's not going to help the employee, and it could get a supervisor in trouble. So so that's why trying to manage it as you go along is better. So these are some other dangers: fearing your own retaliation. Sometimes accidentally organizations reward us for not taking action. Starting a conversation in a harsh way can be a problem. Being blindsided by sidetracking, and we'll talk about that in a second. Um, and fearing what would happen to you if the problem is addressed. Um, and then after habits are well established, like for example, if you become a manager and and you inherit a problem, that can be really, really hard to deal with. Okay, so we have barriers to progress. Um, and this is a common that after you confront the issue, you just hope the problem will go away, and you avoid follow-up, and the employee's performance improves in the short term. So you always want to adapt a long-term strategy. Don't assume that things are going to get better right away. Uh, I'm a fan of what I call lots of mini interventions rather than one grand big intervention that you have excessive expectations about what's going to change. Mini interventions, um, but moving it down the road, uh, not repeating the same intervention, but but you know taking it to the next logical step. Okay, so these are sidetracks. This is when employees take you off your game. So this is why we say when you're going to meet with an employee to address a performance issue, to coach them, um, you want to know at the beginning what your agenda is. What am I trying to get through during this conversation, so that when you get off track, you can keep bringing it back. And these are some of the many ways that employees get you off track. And these aren't manipulative. Some of them are, but usually they're not manipulative. They're genuine, but they still take you off track. Okay. All right. So barriers to intervention. You know about these. There are organizational barriers that can get in the way. We're not going to have time today to address these. Just know that these exist. And then just a brief note about enabling. Um, we call enabling good intentions with bad results. Or another way to say it is supportive behavior applied to the wrong person. The example that I give is if you ask me if you could borrow $10 or even $100 and you're going to pay me back on payday, um, probably if you do that as a supervisor, you're probably off track already. But if I'm a coworker or even a friend, if you ask me if you could borrow $100 and I give you $100 and then payday comes and you give me back that $100, you might say I was being a good friend. I was helping you avoid the bill collectors. But if I give you $100 and you don't pay me back, uh, and maybe ask me for another $100 in a couple of weeks, now it looks like I'm enabling you by giving you the $100. So sometimes it's the same behavior um, that it's just applying it to somebody who's not being responsible back to you. So what I mean by that is enabling isn't a crime, and we all can fall into that from time to time. So the idea is to just note when you're doing it and change tactics, stop doing it. Another big sign that you may be enabling is when you're acting outside of your value system or allowing boundaries that you would never cross otherwise. Talking to somebody at 2 in the morning repeatedly uh, might be an example of that. Um, Letting people get away with things that you would never normally let somebody get away with is another example. So you want to watch out for that. Like I said, we can't ask polling questions because of our software problem today, but here's a question for you. Um, and this is, I usually throw these in to see if you're paying attention and if my points are getting across. So an employee with performance concerns will be motivated most by strong reprimands and discipline, verbal support for effort aligned with desired outcomes, or unconditional acceptance of the employee. And the answer we're shooting for here is number 2. So number 1, strong reprimands and discipline usually will not motivate an employee. Um, disciplinary action is a part of managing employee problems, and it's a necessary part. We all need to know where the limit is, where the line is, and what the rules are, and they need to be applied. But that isn't the same thing as it being motivating. Um, you can get a little bit of motivation out of, I'm going to do this because I don't want to get in any more trouble. But that's usually not, you're not activating an internal motivation. You're going to activate internal uh, motivation by number 2, being verbally supportive. Remember, I said soft on the person, um, and and particularly want to help your employees align with their desired outcome. So, what do I mean by that? So, you might assume, I know you want to do a good job. I know you want to be successful here. And I noticed that when you did X, Y, or Z, it seemed like that was helping. Or you might have a conversation with an employee and say, I know this is how you want to be. I know you don't like the fact that, you've had 4 complaints about you. And I know you would like to be seen as being a hard worker. What are some ways that you think you might um, be able to make that happen? So those are the kinds of conversations that can lead to more motivation. And the third thing here, unconditional acceptance of the employee, is not the right answer because you're not guiding people in any way. So while you could say, I believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all human beings, I believe that. That's different than um, communicating with employees by just saying, oh, I know you're a great person. And if that's all you say, that's not helpful. So the number 2 answer here is correct because you're trying to help them align with their desired outcomes and assumed values. We assume there are values that all of us have about wanting to be a hard worker, wanting to be seen as caring, as trustworthy, and so that's what you're going for there. Okay, you can't make a person change, but you as a supervisor or manager may be in the best position to do something to generate positive change. You might even, and I know I'm sounding dramatic, but you might save someone's life by confronting an issue and getting them into help. You may help keep their family together. You may prompt someone to deal with a problem that they know they need to deal with. You are one more mirror for them, giving them an accurate reflection of how they're coming across. So this slide is my attempt to motivate you to see why it's good for you and it's good for the employee for you to address issues head on with them. Okay. All right, now we're going to deal with conflict. We have 6 minutes. Um, I'm going to give you some assumptions and some ideas here, and we're not going to obviously cover this in great detail. So you probably know that conflict is natural, unavoidable, um, and that it can occur in any situation. So I'm going to move on from this. It's natural, um, and uh, and relates to all these things. Personality style differences, hot buttons are an issue, and by hot buttons we mean when people will get angry or upset when something you say or do hits a part of them, like maybe hits hard against a value they have, or in some cases, past issues they've had. So this, I already talked about harsh versus soft startups. Um, so leading off a conversation in ways that are accusing or critical are called harsh. And research shows that 96% of the time, if you can go 3 minutes without either person getting upset, there's a 96% chance the conversation will end uh, well. I love this slide. We use this a lot to help explain why people have reactions that they have. So the reaction is the blue oval, and it's based on the confluence of my beliefs and values, my vulnerability in the present moment, meaning whatever I've got going on in my life, and then whatever the event is that triggered. So I can have a big reaction to something small. You know, you tell me I have to move to an office where I no longer have a window, and I just can't handle that. Maybe because of the confluence of these three events. Uh, you want to prepare for escalation if you can, especially when you're having a conversation with an employee about performance issues. Watch for the signals, um, know your hot buttons, know how to calm yourself down. So it always starts with you. Be prepared for if an employee gets upset, the chances are very high that you're going to get upset as well. So knowing how you calm down by breathing and moving from fight or flight to pause and plan. So hitting the pause button, maybe even ending the conversation and saying, let's come back to this. Let's come back to this in a little while when we're calmer, and go away and think about what you want to do differently, what you want to say differently. Um, our biological bodies are wired for uh, um, more immediate uh, danger. But in most cases in the workplace, I'm not now talking about violence. That's a whole different presentation. I'm talking now about interpersonal conflict. Almost all the time, you have time to step back and think about how you want to act, what you want to do. So, but your body's going to be wanting you to do something faster. So that's your challenge, is convincing your body that there's no immediate danger, and that you have time to step back and think about what you want to do next. So like I said, manage your own reactions first, and then that can help you to de-escalate others, kind of in the same way that I'm talking about right now. Encouraging employees to breathe, reminding them they have time. What do they need right now just to calm down. And then assessing the readiness of participants for a conversation, particularly if you have two employees who are in conflict. You don't want to just sit them down with you to have a conversation if they are not ready for that. That conversation may not go well. You may have to have a conversation with each of them to prepare them for the conversation with both of them. All right, we're almost out of time. This is a great model. You can look this up. And I put the source at the bottom of the slide. Thomas Kilman conflict instrument. They came up with this idea that there are essentially 5 conflict positions. And if you can imagine a graph, and on one side of the graph is assertiveness or power, and then on the other side is no, I'm sorry, on the one side of the graph is task, so getting something done, and on the other axis is relationship, so task and relationship. Then you can have these 5 positions for how you decide to deal with a conflict, and each of them has value depending on what the situation is. So I don't have time to go into it, unfortunately, but it's a really cool model, and I encourage you to look that up. Another also very good model, there's a book called Crucial Conversations, and this group wrote another book called Crucial Confrontations, and it's for helping you to deal with what they call a crucial conversation is when stakes are high, opinions vary, and emotions run strong. And it's based on the idea that sometimes you have to address conflict head on because the stakes are high, because to not talk about it would be a worse outcome. So then they teach you skills for how to do that. Okay. All right, I'm going to sign off and leave some time for questions. So what questions do you have that I can answer? I hope I gave you uh, things to think about and resources that you can look into further. Do we have any questions, Brenda?
I'm just looking at the questions panel now, and I don't see that we have any questions at this time. We could give
Okay.
people a few minutes to type in any questions they may have. You could also, if a question comes up, you can email the webinars at reliantvh.com email address, and we can follow up with the question via email.
Okay, and I see people are asking for the slides, and those get automatically sent, right? Is that right?
Yeah, the PowerPoint slides and the handout from today will be emailed following the webinar.
Yeah, so there you go. So when somebody wanted the dysfunctions of the team, that's 5 dysfunctions of a team, and the author is Patrick Lencioni, Lencioni, I believe. He's written a bunch of good books, and like I said, they're entertaining. I think you would like it, and it gives you a way of viewing how to manage your team. So it's not just about conflict, but conflict is a part of it. And he's the guy that I learned that a couple of the terms that I use today, like unfiltered debate. And I love that idea. I love the idea that that in teams, when you want people to speak up and to object and to say what they don't like about something or what they think should be different, you want that. You want to encourage that. But then you also want your whole team to say, to understand they're not always going to get what they want. So you want them to feel good about that. Oh, and somebody asked about Buckingham. I think, is that a question? Marcus Buckingham. My favorite book of his is called go put your strengths to work, but he's got a couple of them. And he just writes in a very clear manner about how to use this strengths model. And he's got tools in the book. Um, he's not allowed to use the strengths finder model anymore um, because he left the organization and they've copyrighted that. But he used to use it, and and so I think it dovetails nicely with the strengths finder model. All right. Did I miss anything else? I could see some of these. Yeah, I think that looks like that's it.
Yeah, I think that looks like all the questions that we have for today.
Okay. Well, thank you all for attending. I hope you got something useful out of it. I apologize for the for shoving so much material into an hour. I hope, in my experience, some people like that, and some people get a little bit annoyed because they would like more explanation of each part. But um, please email us if you have any questions, you want more information about a particular aspect of what we talked about today. And use the EAP. Use it for coaching as a supervisor and recommend it to your employees. All right. Well, I hope you all have a good rest of your day and a good rest of your week.